You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Hey everyone that's listening, welcome to On the Way Home, a platform that shines a light on the people, policies, and possibilities shaping Canada's housing and homelessness sector. I'm Emmy Kelly from Blue Door, and I actually want to start this episode with an amazing story I just heard from our Blue Door team. It's a powerful story that brings together housing, health, and employment, which are our strategic pillars in real time, and something that you'll hear our guests speak about today. We run a program called Passage House in York Region, which is a transitional program. A Passage House client was referred to us from a treatment center. He joined the Construct training program, which is our trades-based employment social enterprise. He secured a great job and is now stably housed. This is the kind of transformation we work for every day, and it is your listenership, your action, your support that make this work possible. Today we are joined by Aislinn Clancy, MPP for Kitchener Centre, on the show. You're going to hear a lot of important work, advocacy, and education that she is doing to end homelessness in her community. Thanks for joining. Hi, Aislinn. Welcome to On the Way Home. We're so lucky to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really delighted to be with you.
So we're going to start with our signature question that we ask each of our guests. What does home mean to you?
I think it's where we take refuge, where we make our meals, where we feed our families, where we recharge our batteries, rest. It means a lot to all of us. Probably each of us has a different meaning, but that's kind of what it means to me.
Before we dive deeper, I'd love for our listeners to get to know you a bit better. Could you share about your background and the path that brought you to where you are today?
No problem. I studied kind of business and international development, and it led me to go to El Salvador, and I worked with a lot of folks who had fled war or their families had fled and they were disconnected. So when I moved back to Canada, I worked in settlement. That story of people finding refuge spoke to me. So I was really honored and lucky to be able to work in settlement, which is supporting new immigrants to make Canada home, to find home here. And that led to a social work degree, school social work. But as I became more involved in climate action, I realized that governments weren't doing the work they need to do, showing leadership and making the changes they need to make to ensure that future generations have a livable planet. So I got behind local political action, campaigns that, we got our first Green MP in Kitchener Centre, and I was part of a group called Citizen Climate Lobby. But then eventually, you look inside and you're like, well, I keep looking around at who else is going to do this work. And I thought it could be me, that I had those tools now after helping so many others. So kind of got into city council and then ran for provincial government in 2023.
You started as a city councillor, you mentioned, and a school social worker in Kitchener. Could you tell us, you did tell us a bit about what made you interested to run, to have a broader impact and to exercise that leadership that you felt you weren't seeing. Was there anything else that helped you to make that decision to run for MPP, and how have those early roles shaped your priorities at Queen's Park?
Yeah, I always think of people and planet. As a social worker, I felt like I kept fighting more fires, and more people were, unable to put food on the table or couldn't pay the rent. And you realize that my job was just fighting fires that were systemic gaps, and then you always look to your leaders saying, well, maybe they just don't know and I have to teach them. And there's a lack of capacity sometimes at varying levels of government. People come from all walks of life. They don't always see things through a social work lens or a climate lens. And then when I was a city councillor, I realized the government, especially the Ontario government, was making a lot of changes or not making changes they needed to make. And it was really affecting the impact we could have municipally, like on our climate goals, as our grid got dirtier, as those renewable contracts got ripped up in 2018. In Ontario, we've relied more on natural gas power plants, so our emissions have started to rise again. You realize that as we electrify as a city, that compromised our ability to meet those targets that we were really working hard for. So the province really holds a lot of power. And so I felt like, we need more climate action voices and more people-focused voices at the provincial level that could kind of push the needle.
You mentioned how provincial inaction on housing and healthcare has deeply affected communities like Kitchener. Could you share a moment or a story that made you realize just how critical leadership is on these issues?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of door knocking for my municipal election, and I bumped into a friend and a bunch of her neighbors. They were living in a townhome complex. They were all low income folks on ODSP, folks with disabilities, newcomers, and the property had just been sold to a new landlord who was turning it into condos, and so was renovating all the tenants, the whole bunch of them, and they were scared. And they came to me and they wanted to get support, and so I joined with our local eviction prevention program and our Waterloo Region Community Legal Services, and we put together a town hall. Most of the folks there were really scared. They didn't know their rights, so a lot of them moved out and end up paying double or triple the amount, and it's really compromised their quality of life and their ability to feed their kids and meet their needs. Or others had to move in with a grandparent or move out of town and lose their communities. So the impact was really huge, and even though we really did push back, we empowered this group in our community to stay put or get compensated properly. More and more as I door knocked, and again during my provincial campaign, I saw more and more communities, especially low-income folks, kind of marginalized through this way of financialization of housing. Folks who are looking to make a quick buck. There was a guy named Mike Beer. He had a YouTube video. This was the one who bought their property. He had made a video to say you could get 19% from tenant turnover. And that just, as a social worker especially, kids stopped going to school, people stopped meeting their mental health needs, their physical health was compromised. I had families say that a gentleman say he had a heart attack, another who said he was having panic attacks and was diagnosed with depression because of this threat of homelessness. So you saw how widespread this issue was, how the financialization of housing had affected people's lives, and mostly low-income folks with other sorts of vulnerabilities. And it wasn't just a pull up your socks kind of deal, and there wasn't anywhere to go because our community has 0% vacancy rate. And since then, we've seen a hemorrhaging of people onto the streets in Waterloo Region. Our rates of homelessness have doubled in the past 3 years. And in Ontario, we have 81,000 people homeless. And when it comes to healthcare, we see how much that's changed the way folks use healthcare. It's really, it is healthcare. Housing is healthcare. If you don't have stable housing, it's very hard to be healthy. And I saw that anecdotally through the people that I've talked to, but I've also been talking with hospitals across the province who see folks who are unsheltered, in and out of the emergency rooms, back within 90 days with the same issue because they can't treat their illness. We see their rate of stay. I think London just published an article saying they stay double the time, costing the hospital $15,000 more per visit for an unsheltered person. So there's just so many ways in which it impacts people's physical and mental health. And we see the rates of homelessness really escalating. I think AMO projects that we'll hit 300,000 by 2035 if we don't have a plan and if the recession unfolds as it seems to be unfolding. So that's the concern I have.
Wow, that's a lot and backed by a lot of data, which makes it very clear. We are facing a crisis here that we need to pay attention to. Could you tell us about your Homelessness Ends with Housing Act? What inspired this bill? Why is now the time to make a 10-year commitment to end homelessness in Ontario?
You know, Chair Edmund in our region said if you measure what you value and you change what you measure. Right now, we've seen the government kind of move backwards and kind of not measure homelessness. But AMO, our municipalities, they see the need to measure this. So they put out a report in 2025 of this year. They funded it. It's really well done, collects a lot of data. Our region did a pit count, like a place and time count of how many folks are homeless, and that's how we got that double the rates in 3 years statistic. So the government, I know, is floundering. They keep, we see the premier saying get a job. We see them come out with Bill 6, which basically ends encampments by putting people in jail, which costs the taxpayer $130,000 and costs people maybe their lives or possibility of recovery, because that's not a path to recovery. It's not a path to well-being and wellness, is jail, because people end up homeless again when they are discharged from jail. There aren't a lot of supports in place there. So, I look to places like Finland and Houston and Winnipeg. I've been learning about more places that are looking at these wraparound supports, making sure that they really take bold action to ensure that people get housing, seeing how important that is for people to get healthy and make gains and progress in their life and find well-being, that housing has to come first. You can't address addiction, you can't address healthcare needs if you're wondering where you're going to stay that night, or if you're living in a traumatic environment where you're overheated, like we're seeing right now, when you are suffering from heat exhaustion or the thought of frostbite or freezing. And stable housing, it has to be permanent stable housing, because we know that even shelter beds they don't end chronic homelessness. It has to be supportive housing, has to have a portable benefit where people can live all over the place. They don't have to wait for big facilities to get built. So that housing first approach is really important. That report from AMO in January of 2025 really spelled out what's needed. The portable housing benefit, supportive housing for those who need those wraparound supports. We need a committee of experts. We can't just make this up based on polling data and what's trending on X. We need to make decisions that are based in evidence, based in lived experience of people with homelessness and the experts. And we need to have a plan and create that plan and report back on how it's going. I think we need that transparency and accountability to show that this is a plan that will work. And that's what we see in these other jurisdictions, that when you put housing first, it really does make those numbers go down over time.
Wow. Yes. Your legislation emphasizes a housing first approach. I'm sure many listeners on the show are familiar with Housing First, but for those who are not, I'm wondering if you can explain what Housing First means for individuals experiencing homelessness and how it differs from other strategies that Ontario has used in the past.
Yeah, we know shelters are important. They keep people alive, but we know that they're a band-aid, right? Until somebody is rooted in stable housing, a lot of those other goals just aren't going to happen. And I know that from school social work. If a family was worried about where they're going to live, or they're getting evicted, that child's learning goes down the toilet. Maybe they can't go to work because they haven't slept well. Their physical and mental health goes downhill. So really, as long as you don't have stable housing, that is the first priority. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you have stable food, if you have stable housing, then the body can reset, the body can relax, and your cortisol can go down. You can start to look ahead into the future and see what's next. So we see jurisdictions like Finland, I think 20% of their housing new builds is affordable housing. They ensure that everybody has a place to live, and then they make sure that those people have the supports they need to make sure the housing is successful. They call it negative exits. If you put somebody in housing and they aren't given supports and then they end up homelessness again. And if people are living in shelter, some kinds of shelter, you have to be out in the morning at 7 a.m. So what do you do with your stuff? You have to figure out where to be. So people just end up being in this turnstile of moving from place to place where they're allowed to be, getting pushed away by a bylaw officer, a police officer, or a security guard. People just can't move on with their life. They can't become healthy. So we can't say when you get clean, you can have housing. When you can be reliable in this way, you can get housing. When you have a job, you get housing. No, people need housing to reset everything, to become healthy, and that really sets the trajectory forward to be permanently housed and to be able to be housed, because some people are really learning how to be housed again after they've been homeless. There's a lot to reorganize in their brains and their bodies, and we see that when people get supportive housing with wraparound supports and they aren't told to be clean, or they are not told to be this or that they can come in, their addictions improve, their openness to treatment and health improves. And so it really is the beginning point, the first step to getting well.
Thank you. The bill mandates the creation of a homelessness advisory committee that includes individuals with lived experience. Why? At the risk of stating the obvious, is it essential to bring these voices to the table, and how do you envision their input shaping the strategy?
I think too often, don't get me wrong, a lot of people who are outreach workers, experts in the field like yourselves, they have so much knowledge and evidence. Sometimes when I sit with somebody who has had the experience of homelessness, you realize that it's not that simple, that maybe folks at the table have never lived with an opioid addiction. They don't know how it feels to go through withdrawal, and that it's not that simple to just go cold turkey. They don't know how it feels to be treated a certain way when you go to hospital or to a municipal building or public space, or ask for help. And they know, for example, that if they want addiction support, they need it right then and there. In Ontario, you have to wait 10 months. So if that housing plan doesn't also have a plan to make sure that addiction treatment and recovery is responsive, that people haven't built that trust, what it means to build that trust, what it means to try to be housed when you've been unhoused for so long, when you're worried about your stuff being stolen, or it's too quiet, and you're still really worried about what's going to happen if you fall into a deep sleep. Is somebody going to hurt you? I think that empathy really gets built across the table, and we can look at housing through new eyes. And so, and too often it's almost an insult when people know better. It's a paternalistic approach when you say, we're going to treat homelessness, but not from a perspective of someone who's been unhoused. So I think it shows a lot of, bold steps. It shows a lot of really deep humility to understand that experience, so you can match the data, match the services, match the healthcare perspectives with somebody who's telling you, no, that's not going to work because it has to be like this. So it has to be a holistic group, and it has to include people who are living this every day. Otherwise, it's insulting. And I don't think it shows a holistic approach to each decision that gets made. Yeah.
I did want to ask you, you've just touched on something now and earlier, kind of about the continuum that needs to be built from homelessness to housing. You also referred to some of your experience internationally and models that you saw working. I'm wondering if you might touch on a few of the differences you've seen in successful models versus what we might be doing in Canada that gives us like a comparator that we can think about.
Yeah, I think it was Milwaukee someone was talking to me about recently, where it's like getting everybody on the same page, like let's get everybody. I think in Milwaukee, it was one city. They had a really good champion. He built trust with healthcare providers, police, paramedics, housing providers, not-for-profits, because it is an investment. We know over time we'll save money, and it will relieve pressure on our healthcare system, on our policing. So you have to get ahead of things. We can't just keep band-aiding our way through this. We have to be bold. We have to make sure the money's there and that there's full support. So I really appreciate how they've taken that step. And even in Winnipeg, the commitment and the leadership of Wab Kinew to say, we're going to end homelessness homelessness in a way that works and with compassion. And we're going to start really one at a time, making sure people are permanently housed, and work with folks and meet them where they're at and try to partner with them all the way along their journey. And I mean, the problem with housing now is that all the rungs on the ladder, there's a bunch of them that are missing now. Attainable home ownership, attainable renting for people who even work full-time minimum wage. We don't have anywhere in Ontario where you can use 30% of your wage and work full-time minimum wage and afford a place to live. So we see how, yes, we need to address encampments. We need to look at permanent solutions. We need all hands on deck and a bold action of how we're going to move forward. And we do see those rates go down. We see, I think Houston, their rates were cut in half or more because they've taken this focus of not, because otherwise people end up back homeless again if we haven't set them up for success. And you really need to follow people along their journey to make sure they have the proper supports. But we do also need to consider those other rungs on the ladder, like Habitat's providing attainable home ownership, and they're saying 70,000 to 100,000 to get into attainable home ownership. And we have a group called Union Co-op that's a for-profit, but a 3% increase or whatever, but they ensure that anyone working full-time pays 30% of their wage to be housed. So we can do all the rungs on the ladder, but we definitely, for that core group that are really at risk of losing their housing, that we keep them housed. And if they are unhoused, we make sure they're successful in getting further ahead. And it really takes a team approach, with all the perspectives and everybody on board, because if government's not on board or police is not on board or healthcare is not on board, it's going to undermine the overall mission of the project.
And I'm interested because I think the struggle with keeping housing deeply affordable or meeting that 30% of people's income target is always about the financials, other than supply, which you've addressed. Have you seen any models, innovative models around the financing to keep things affordable?
Yeah, what I find is that even landlords are on board with the portable housing benefit. So we just don't have a good, our benefit, the housing benefits that people get are either too hard to get. There isn't enough available to keep people housed. Because right now, there's zero, like we're losing affordable housing. So we put forward a past due, and it's about tenant protection. So it gets rid of some of the loopholes that help landlords rent evict, dem evict, put up above guideline increases, all those ways that we take affordable housing in our communities, undermine tenant rights to kind of displace people into homelessness. So we do need those protections to maintain the affordable housing we have. I know in Waterloo Region, for every affordable unit we build, we lose 39 in the private sector. So, and we just aren't building affordable housing. Like in Ontario, I always get the stat wrong, but it's something like 95% of our affordable housing was built before 1993. Canadian government, Ontario government got out of the business of building housing, and we just haven't built it. So the supply isn't there. So that housing benefit ensures that landlords can get the adequate amount that they need to pay their mortgage or whatever. People can get a housing benefit to top up, the ODSP and OW housing allowances that are ridiculous. They just don't make any sense. So we do need it to make sense so people can be housed. And that portable benefit means we don't have just like lumps of people kind of institutionalized together, which can be problematic sometimes, that people can find a portable housing benefit and they can live in the communities where they have supports. They can find housing in neighborhoods, and people can live all over the place. It really gives them back choice. A lot of folks who are living unhoused, don't get a choice, and having choice really matters to say, where do you feel comfortable? What's a neighborhood that's close to transit or close to the supports that you need? So we do need that housing benefit. It's so much cheaper. Like, again, a hospital is very expensive. Jails are very expensive. So if we can really provide a housing benefit, we can move people out of institutions and this kind of clinical care or judge and jury care that really makes it actually harder for them to succeed in the future because now they have a criminal record, so getting a job down the road is challenging because a lot of people don't want to hire someone with a criminal record. So we've just made it harder for you to move ahead in life. So having that portable benefit really makes a difference to having choice and also keeping people housed who are at risk of losing their housing.
So back to the bill. Annual reporting and public transparency are built into your bill. Why is public accountability so important in addressing homelessness? And how do we ensure that government commitments lead to real change on the ground?
We live in an age of misinformation and disinformation, and we see in our government right now that the commitment's not there. There is no plan, there's no goal, and again, we have to measure what we value and we'll change what we measure. So if we measure something right now, for example, all hospitals don't have to measure if somebody coming in is housed or unhoused. To me, that is the most important health data. We could ask someone, we ask their income, we might ask their health history, but being unhoused means you're at risk of being very unhealthy. So we need good data like health data. How much did somebody use the emergency room if they're unhoused? Did somebody end up unhoused again? I was just talking to someone who worked in forensic criminality, and they have people who reoffend, and sometimes the numbers would go down and they would go back and check, did those people die? And they said, oh yes, our numbers of recidivism went down because people who repeat offend have died. We don't have that data. So if our rates of folks who are unhoused goes down, but it's because people have died, we need that to be represented in the data. We need to collect that and say, why are people passing away? Or why are the numbers going down? Is it a good thing or not? And if the numbers are going up, why? What are the root causes of that? What's not working? Because we need to tweak things. Maybe the kinds of drugs that people use have changed. Maybe there's a new trend on how people are being displaced. Maybe more and more people on Ontario OAS, old age security, are losing their housing. Who is becoming unhoused? We see a lot of seniors becoming unhoused, folks with disabilities. So if those groups are increasing, we want to address, okay, maybe folks with disability need better benefits, or we need to catch that or increase their housing allowance, or folks who are on OAS, we need to make sure that more things are covered. And those folks who don't have as much for retirement, maybe we could look at a seniors-centric housing model like we have in Waterloo. So, if you measure it, you can really tell a story or start asking questions about where those gaps lie. It has to be a holistic approach, and it has to be transparent and accountable to the public, because the people are paying for this. Like, taxpayers really want to address homelessness. We want encampments to be a thing of the past because it's a moral injury. This is not what people think it means to be from Canada. It means to be an Ontarian. They don't want encampments. They don't want people to be homeless. And so we are accountable to them. And that's what a report shows. It holds government accountable.
You've also spoken out against the government's Bill 6. For listeners who may not be familiar, could you explain what Bill 6 entails and why you've chosen to oppose it?
Yeah, I was opposed to the closing of our safe consumption site. So we took away the healthcare system that helps people who are using drugs to do drugs in a safe way. Bill 6 makes it illegal for folks to do drugs in public. So if you're unhoused, like if you're housed and you do drugs, you're allowed to do whatever, like you have your addiction or you have your use, and you can do that. And it respects that people are where they're at, but we're further criminalizing folks who use drugs, and it further criminalizes folks who are unsheltered. So it's trying to push municipal police into policing homeless in an aggressive way that leads to a $10,000 fine. So if folks there can even be a bias, like if someone's at risk of coming back to the place they can be put in jail just for a presumption of like, yes, I think this person will come back. So it really puts a lot more bias and discretion in the hands of police, which isn't always helpful. It's not evidence-based. Will this person return to the spot or not? So using something like trespass as a way to put someone in jail and fine them $10,000. So we know that People who are unhoused don't have $10,000. So this $10,000 fine just creates another stress for folks who are already dealing with a lot. It cleans up spaces by putting people into jail. So we're investing more taxpayer dollars in building more jails instead of building more affordable housing, instead of building supportive housing. So I just find the whole bill is based on a lot of bias that's not rooted in evidence. It's not rooted in data. It's a failed American policy that has not proven to work. And we know that people get out of jail and they return back into homelessness and sometimes addiction and other issues that they were facing. So it's not a long-term good approach. And so we just need more people to understand that the government tries to explain that they're taking care of encampments and they're doing something about it, but really what they're doing isn't based in evidence, and it won't work. It's really inhumane.
For our listeners who want to help or get more involved in the community, what's a good place to start? And
Yeah. You know what? There's lots of ways to get involved. We're seeing a lot of action with Bill 5. For example, people are getting into rallies. They're showing up. They're talking to their municipal councillors, their MPPs, their MPs about the bills that are coming forward, about homelessness, about Bill 5, which is basically the government giving themselves permission to get rid of any rule. So they can pick anywhere in the province. They can get rid of all the legislation and all the protections in the name of the economy. So cabinet minister can decide to do whatever they want, wherever they want in the province, and often in the name of a corporation. So it's important that people kind of spread the word. I don't think a lot of people know what Bill 6 is all about, that we're dealing with homelessness by putting people in jail and fining them $10,000. So please make sure you connect with your local elected officials at any level of government to speak up about this. I hope people can write letters to the editor. They can write op-eds, for example. Sorry. We have a dog. Yes. So all these things can be addressed, and we build the political will, because really this government, the Ford government, for example, makes a lot of their decisions based on what's the political will. They look at polling data every day and what's the attitude towards something. And so if we continue to push back and make people aware about these problematic bills, Bill 5 and Bill 6, we can help the public speak up and move that political will.
Sometimes I feel a lot of it is educating yourself, because, oftentimes when I speak with people, there's a sense of frustration, but also, the education around what can we do differently or how can we do it differently. So maybe I'll ask you if you can share where people can learn more about your work and the Homelessness Ends with Housing Act, and any other way that people could reach out to you if you're open.
Yeah, no problem. So the bill isn't getting debated or voted on until we're back in the fall. So I'm hoping to build support across party lines. So this is a bill that's co-sponsored with Lee Fairclough. She was a VP of clinical care at CAMH. She ran our St. Mary's Hospital. So she really brings a lot of expertise into this. So I'm here not to say I want to become rich and famous because of this idea. I really want this bill to get passed. So I hope that folks across the province could try to get their MPP to support the bill. We do have more information on the website, Aislinn Clancy MPP, I think .ca, or and our GPO website. We're going to be doing petitions. We'll be trying to get endorsements. So if you know a group, maybe your municipality would like to endorse the bill, or maybe you're a firefighter or somebody who works in the fields who would like to endorse the bill. We've had a lot of support from academics that work in housing prevention and homelessness prevention and housing. They've spoken up to support the bill. So we're really looking to build a broad set of support so that when the bill gets debated in the fall and we vote on it, we can move it forward. And I am in talks with the Minister Flack. So if people want to reach out to our Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and share support for this bill, I do believe there's an openness. I know Minister Flack wants to do better, to address encampments, to learn more, to do things that work. And so him and I have been in talks about different components of the bill that the government could start moving on, because it's really not about whether the bill gets passed or not passed. It's about making sure that this vision for ending homelessness moves forward.
Aislinn, your passion and energy are clear, and it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today, hearing your story. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for covering this. Housing is really important to us at the Green Party, as you know, and so I really am grateful that you're showing how housing is an end to homelessness. So thank you so much for covering this, and I hope your listeners can reach out if they have any more questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Homelessness Ends with Housing Act and commitment to Kitchener Centre, Aislinn Clancy. Truly inspiring. For our listeners, a quick recap. Check out the Act's 10-year strategy, the importance of data transparency, supportive housing, portable benefits, and the importance of a lived experience component in the work that we do. Before we go, if you find value in this conversation, please subscribe to On the Way Home, share this episode with someone who cares about housing justice, and leave a review. We are hoping to cover some of the bills in upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep caring, keep talking, and keep finding home.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.